Gregg is the latest addition to the team. He's got a great background. Unfortunate thing, he went to UT and the University of Pennsylvania. But we understand that if we have 2 or 3 Aggies in the group and a bunch of UT grads, it's pretty much balanced. That's good enough. But the whole idea is he started to look into the impact of all these policies, which is huge. But he's done a lot of work for chemical companies, DuPont, Monsanto, Solutia. Then he went to work for a little company called UBS, trying to figure out how to analyze the performance of chemical companies. So we've been able to look at all this stuff. He got the right kind of background. But the good news is he has other guys who can do the analysis, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but we're going to try to help TPPF understand the problems with ERCOT and take it away.
When we were talking about what I might present, what we looked at was the legislative initiatives in the U.S. government. We're just finishing up a 116th Congress. The guys are hitting the door, but they're doing a little bit of damage before they hit the door, and we'll talk about that. And what we're saying is if we look at the list of unfulfilled objectives for the 116th Congress, some of them may go over to the 117th Congress. So what I try to do is get an objective look at everything that's in the till and what's going on now. One of the items that we pointed out was this Climate Equity Act of 2020 that Kamala Harris introduced this in the Senate, and we'll talk a little bit about that. This is really it could be just an election year publicity stunt. It could be real, but this is the sort of stuff that's getting introduced in the Congress. We're going to talk about Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. My gut feeling from the flow of both articles, support groups, PACs that have started up, climate, carbon tax initiatives that have been introduced, is this is going to be a big push in the upcoming Congress. And we'll talk about other legislation and climate-related issues. Now, one of the things that's after we were started to look at the list of legislative initiatives, one of the things that came up was a couple bills, HR 4447, which is in the House, and that has a companion bill of Senate 2657. Now these look like they're going to get serious look as the Congress leaves wraps up the session, but there's a certain amount of effort to try to get these things rammed through. So again, the first thing we're going to look is this Climate Equity Act with this Kamala Harris. Okay, so we're going to look at today climate equity, carbon taxes, the ones I talked about. Other things that you see, you can look at a lot of the proposed legislation, and there are many, many bills. There's a continuing push for green energy in terms of both infrastructure and support. Carbon capture and sequestration is a theme that's been picked up by the Republicans, and you'll see this. This is their alternative to do nothing. Then we're going to talk about other climate initiatives and important things. Just to a little bit of an extent, we're going to talk about the Paris Climate Agreement and the endangerment finding and this sort of thing. So we won't spend a lot of time on that, but we'll just mention those. Okay, let's talk about what sets national policy. Bedrock climate policy assumptions. The anthropogenic global warming hypothesis and extreme weather events. This is a very popular, almost propagandistic basis for all climate. If you climate legislative actions, if you question this, it's a very tough uphill sledding for Congress people. They don't want to talk about this, certainly in election year. They don't want to say, well, this is not true. You're not going to get an audience. The UN's IPC policy position is a fallback that supposedly represents what is good science, true science, and the so-called consensus. So these are bedrock assumptions, and they weave their way into all of the legislative initiatives. the strategy of mitigation is preferable to adaptation. Now, mitigation means lowering greenhouse gases. Adaptation is, you could say, well, if climate change does happen, would it be a lot cheaper to adapt to it? There's a group called the 50-to-1 thing, which claims that adaptation would be 50 times cheaper than suppose mitigation. Green virtue signaling. Everybody's seen the Democratic debates. I mean, they would go through, and do you believe in climate change? You believe, and how serious is it? And they all did it, you know, tried to do it, outdo each other. One says the world will end in 20 years, the next guy ups that to 15, and then you go to 10, and it was really ridiculous, the amount of the extreme responses to climate change. The alarmist views, by the way, are highly dependent upon climate models. If you look at the actual climate data, extreme events, everything else, the only thing that people can hang on to that support the alarmist position are these models, like we've talked about. The climate sensitivity assumptions are very foundational to global warming, and this is an issue that's going to come up. That's wrapped into the models. The Cherny sensitivity established in 1979, the 3 degrees warming per doubling of CO2 it's in the models. It's in people's thinking, and this is a bedrock foundation for the alarmist position. So what could policy responses be? I mean, what is the magnitude? Well, they could go from the Green New Deal, which is literally trillions of dollars over a significant amount of time, or it could be sort of minor support. Now, what is the legislative process? We're not going to spend a lot of time, but the bill is introduced in the House. It's given a couple readings. Independently, bills are both in the House and Senate. The committee will be referred to a committee. At that point, it's supposed to have some basis in terms of its validity, its authorization, what section of the Constitution or the laws that it fits with. So a lot of bills die in committee. If it just gets voted out of committee and there's a final report, then it goes and gets amendments associated with it. Eventually the House will pass, and you have a similar sequence in the Senate where a similar bill is introduced in the Senate. You have committee referrals and the Senate passes. Eventually you go through reconciliation where they merge the two bills and iron out the differences. Then the President reviews, signs in the law, and then a very important sequence after it's in law, it's translated into regulations. So that's the process. So looking at our Climate Equity Act of 2020, which we talked about, Kamala Harris introduced it. It had the co-sponsor of Bernie Sanders. Committee referral was the Homeland Committee and Government Affairs. It hasn't made it out of committee. It was introduced mid-year, or actually in August. At the same time, in the House, the coordinated bill was sponsored by AOC. There was no co-sponsor at the time, but essentially it was going to be the same approach. So climate equity. What is climate equity? That's the real question. It's not real clear to myself or anyone else. Climate is certainly a subjective. There's no precise definition. You have 30 years of regional weather trends. Some people say is climate, but it's certainly a subjective definition. Equity is a subjective term. You have equity of opportunity or quality of opportunity, quality of results. It's hard to say. So if you add two indefinite things, you get something with no intrinsic operational definition. Ditto for climate justice, environmental justice, and all these. So you have these terms that you can define on the fly. Science, it talks about using the best science to guide where these bills go. But you know, science can't really opine on something that's highly subjective. So what are the basic assumptions of climate equity? And this is right from the original proposal. Climate change is an immediate crisis. These are givens. It is systematic environmental injustices and growing inequities are fueled by climate change, okay? You got it? Climate change is a systematic injustice multiplier that impacts low-income communities, indigenous communities, communities of color, and what's the key phrase, frontline communities. This is the one I really love. It says the federal government should be held accountable for climate change and any alleged impact of frontline communities. So not only are we not going to give people due process or Supreme Court justices due process, we're not even going to give the law due process. You don't have to prove anything. All you got to do is allege that you have frontline communities. Now, are these valid? Every one of these assumptions is quite questionable. Okay. Now, what they would do is establish a new climate equity office. This is bureaucracy 101. The new office is established. There are going to be two parts, two big parts to this. One is to basically provide definitions. The second is to provide enforcement. The primary responsibility to assess and mitigate climate and environmental impact would impact all new laws of frontline communities. In other words, what they'd have to do is judge whether a specific law would impact a frontline community. Any bill with an energy or climate nexus could only be passed with a written report from the director of the CEE office. So, I mean, this gives huge power. I mean, how many bills have an energy or climate impact? I mean, this is a very wide net that they're doing. So we said that they have two parts to the Climate and Environmental Equity Accountability Office. First is the first part that has an advisory board, and they basically establish standards and definitions. They review bills. They determine impacts. They sort of set the ground rules. Then you have the accountability that this is the working group that looks at the impacts of frontline communities, does the research and the like. Now, notice the advisory board of the justice accountability, climate, the justice, the accountability. What they have 10 members, they have communities from frontline communities and advocate groups, okay? So in other words, they're gonna have an advisory board with representatives from frontline communities and advocate groups. If, in other words, you have a radical group that's advocating for frontline communities, they're actually going to be in the board, embedded in the government. Now, here's the really nice one. This office here has directors, and it has directors, literally government employees, embedded in 15 or more departments. In other words, they're going to have employees in these departments watching over them at all times.
You don't have NASA in there?
I didn't see NASA, but that's okay. We'll get there.
It will be.
What is a frontline community? A frontline community is one with socioeconomic disparities, those experiencing environmental injustice, any other form of injustice, or those that economically depend upon fossil fuels, or so-called frontline communities, the ones that can get a special focus. Now, this is another thing I like about this bill. These are frontline populations as defined in the bill. Unhoused population, indigenous population, communities of color, de-industrialized community, rural youth, elderly women, descendants of women or youth. Now, I can hardly think of a population that is not a descendant of women. But I guess there are some out there. I guess if we have clones or something.
Maybe in California.
Yeah. So what do we make of this bill, the climate equity bill? Well, at this point, it's difficult to determine if the bill was a political campaign ploy by Kamala Harris or a serious attempt to formulate public policy. Perhaps it was, she was right in the middle of a primary campaign. Perhaps it was an attempt to leverage a publicity generated by the Green New Deal. You saw AOC is co-sponsoring or sponsoring the House version. The structure of this bill would constitute a large extension of interdepartmental power to an unelected agency. Authority over energy, environment, justice would be outside of the normal agencies that rule on these sort of issues. Okay, it appears, you can read the text, and they talk about grants and the like. So it appears that in the final versions of this, it may be sort of a wealth or income redistribution scheme. And the structure, in my opinion, of the agency raises serious comments about direct access to government power by outside NGOs and social and climate activists. So this is the sort of stuff that gets proposed. Now, the good thing is a lot of these will die in committee, will never go forward. They're mainly gestures. But it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. Okay, this is what I'm thinking, a big push for carbon tax next year. And I just get this from a lot of flavor. There are a lot of PACs that have been instituted. There are a lot of new publications by the tax foundations and all that. So this is something I think is going to get a big push. There's a considerable coordinated push, and I think it's going to be front and center. The advantage of carbon taxes, people point out that it's so-called market-based approaches. In other words, you add carbon taxes to the price of energy, and it reduces the amount of energy. There were 7 carbon tax bills introduced in the 116th Congress, the one we're just fitting up, 7 of them. There were numerous tax studies that I mentioned. PACs have sprung up all over. The California Northeast have implemented cap and trade, or what they're calling cap and invest schemes we'll talk about. And there's also an international effort that's pushed by this. You're going to get a lot of the World Bank, for instance, IMF, OEDC, U.S. Business Roundtable. A lot of people have come out and introduced carbon tax as the rational approach to climate change. Now, there are 2 basic schemes, carbon trading schemes and carbon taxes. Now, carbon taxes are currently preferred in terms of the legislative initiatives, but if you look historically, there have been carbon trading schemes. The McCain-Lieberman in 2003, Waxman-Markey in 2010 were both knocked down. There are regional trading schemes, which we talked about in the California and the Northeast. We'll talk a little bit about that. And there was a carbon trading scheme in Europe that was tried. Now, the problems with carbon trading schemes, the accounting is sort of difficult. Cheating is easier to do on that. You saw a lot of that in Europe. In Europe, a cross-border system was necessary because it was hard to optimize each little country. And the assignment of initial allocations was problematic for these things. So the other issue is carbon trading schemes is probably less constitutionally solid than carbon taxes in terms of what actual federal authority. Now, carbon taxes, I don't know if you've heard of the Baker-Schultz plan. You know, the Baker Institute out here at Rice, the Baker-Schultz plan was proposed. It's a so-called revenue neutral carbon tax plan. I mentioned the 7 legislative initiatives that were put in there, and the PAC, American for Carbon Dividends, got kicked off last year. They got a big website, and they're very strongly funded by some of the deep-pocketed people. Now, what are the problems? It's a regressive nature. It hurts people on the low-income scale more. Inelastic demand. How much fuel or how much carbon-based energy are you going to reduce for what change in price? You know, what would it take for you to quit driving your car? How high would that gasoline price have to be? So this is something, there's a lot of papers out there. I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that question. The escalation of carbon taxes, all of these schemes start out low. They'll start out at $15 a ton and then watch out. The solutions that have been said, well, we're going to make these carbon taxes probably, in fact, they call them Americans for Carbon Dividends, okay? Who doesn't want a dividend, okay? And so that's what they're calling it. So the solutions they have are tax rebates to the less economically advantaged folks, and border tariffs. Border tariffs address this issue of lack of lower competitiveness due to higher costs. So they're putting pressure on Senate Republicans. Historically, the Republicans have been the problems. The Democrats vote for taxes all the time. They'll vote in a block. Yes, we love taxes. The numerous PACs we've talked about they're all targeting Republicans, and they're trying to sell this as an acceptable alternative to the radical Green New Deal. We talked about this group. They're very active. Republicans fear being labeled as do nothing about climate change, and have supported carbon capture and sequestration. You'll see this. I'll list some of the bills later on, but this is their one approach. You know, the Republicans, you know, they're always attacked as you don't care about climate change. You're not doing anything. So this is the carbon capture sequestration is right at the top of their list. And this is something John told me. I haven't been able to identify these, but he says several pacts have been formed that claim to be conservative. However, they support policies that are expansion of government intervention in carbon taxes. So there's some pacts out there flying false flags, apparently. Oh, now I love this. Okay, this is something that came out in the Wall Street Journal, and it was the Climate Leadership Council sent this letter to the Wall Street Journal, and apparently what they'd done is signed up the economists, the group of economists, 3,600 economists, including 27 Nobel laureates. And if you look at the circled part, what they say is climate change is a serious problem calling for immediate national attention. Guided by sound economic principles, we are united in the following policy recommendations. So they take the entire science of climate change, they put it in one sentence and says it's an immediate, serious problem. Hey, case closed, case settled. So this came out of the Wall Street Journal. I thought it was particularly telling. And you know, it's an appeal to authority. You know, we got to have carbon taxes because the world's falling apart. And you know, where's the evidence? And I say, well, the dismal science, which is economics, is it's at its best. You tax something, you get less of it. Okay, hey, I can't argue with that. That's very brilliant. Okay. So what we have for carbon taxes, of the 7 bills, the one on the right, which is in the House, HR763, Deutsch of Florida, has 82 co-sponsors, Democrats. It was introduced in 2019, in January 2019. So it's in committee. It hasn't come out of committee yet. This Senate bill on the right is maybe not exactly related to it. It may be a different Senate bill by all said and purposes. It's probably likely that this is not going to pass this year. But anyway, this is sort of the lead dog right now that people are talking about. Now, what are the key components of 763? They would establish a carbon dividend trust fund to collect taxes and redistribute, to payments to low-income folks. Now, the concept is being sold as revenue neutral. In other words, the carbon taxes go up, but it's going to be plowed back into the economy. Now, how long will this stay revenue neutral? If you know your government and my government, not very long. But it's funny. Holman Jenkins, who I respect quite a bit, has written quite a bit. He's an editorial writer in the Wall Street Journal. He's come out several times and supported this approach. He seems to be reasonable on many other climate things, but I find it strange. I've written to him and I've told him about these carbon taxes. They start $15 a ton. They escalate $10 per year. Okay. If the target of reduction, they have a schedule for reduction. If you miss that target, you're going to go up instead of $10 a year, you're going to go up $15. So a rebate scheme would be established, compensates low-income households. A typical rebate might be $3,300 once a year. Due to the anti-competitive nature, U.S. industry would be neutralized. The taxes would be neutralized through adjustment of import duties levied on those countries who do not have a similar tax structure. In other words, the anti-competitive nature they would try to balance out by levies on imports. Now this is really interesting. If you look at the schedule in terms of the 10% plus how much they increase, the $10 a year, $15 a year, and the number of years, the targeted cut by 2050 would be 90%. In other words, if you hadn't cut 90%, by that year you're going to pay the additional penalty. So it's pretty severe. It's not going to say that you're going to get 90%, but what they're saying is the higher taxes kick in if you don't hit that. So anyway, this is it. These are carbon taxes. The fundamentals worldwide is $290 billion collected in 2019. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation says $50 would generate $1.87 trillion in the U.S. of revenue. I love this when they say revenue. A tax is a revenue. No, it's not a revenue. It's a reallocation of revenue. But you get on the, I was on a webcast from Washington State, and they kept talking about revenue. Revenue. I said, what revenue? It's not revenue. Taxes are not revenue. As of August 2019, 25 nations, 3 subnational jurisdictions have carbon taxes. So this is an international scheme. Tax Foundation, which is conservative, calculates $50 a ton would lower GDP 0.4%, cost $447,000 jobs, and payroll taxes would actually go down as a result. This leakage, they estimated 5 to 19%, and we're back to what is energy demand sensitivity. The National Association of Manufacturers claims carbon taxes would need to be $1,000 a ton for an 80% reduction of carbon by 2050. So I mean that's pretty juicy. I mean, you know, what's the real number? Who knows? But I mean, in other words, the carbon tax would have to be relatively high to make a significant dent. This is what we talked about in terms of where we have the regional efforts. The California efforts, probably the most aggressive. It's called Cap and Invest, and they what they do is they have auctions on carbon, and I think the current auction for carbon in California like $16 a ton, and in the Northeast is like $6 a ton. But they're both sort of cap and trade. They're not real carbon taxes. Recently in the Northeast, they tried. There's 10 states up there. They tried to get Pennsylvania to join in, which was the only energy-producing state. And Pennsylvania said no, thank you. Washington has knocked down carbon taxes a few times. But you see, these things are very regional, and they try to look at their reductions. What they do is they have these auctions, and every year they try to ratchet down the amount of permissible carbon that can be used. California exempts utilities and the like. But anyway, this is the approach, and it's sort of a creeping, ongoing thing, and it's somehow or another it seems to end up in democratic states. I don't know. What they're saying is carbon has a social cost that the oil companies and the like are not paying. Well, this is sort of an argument that's why you recover that cost by through taxes. In '93, Clinton signed Executive Order 12866, mandating the calculation of both costs and benefits. And of course, what do? You only since then, they've only looked at the cost side. They haven't looked at the benefits. In fact, if you look at GDP versus carbon usage globally, that there's actually a benefit, obviously, a benefit for using the wealthiest countries, the highest GDP per capita and all that, are the ones that use the most fossil fuels and carbon. So you could argue there's really a huge net benefit. Various models for this social cost of carbon, looking at $40, $50 a ton now. I think Obama was using $50 a ton as a marker. There are 3 models that calculate social cost of carbon. There's the Page model, the DICE model, and the Fund model. And the only one that really looks at the benefits of carbon, which are the agricultural benefits, are the Fund model with Richard Toll. But basically, they nick you for what they believe is the negative impact of global warming, but they don't give you any credit for that. So long-term cost, the DICE model, it's interesting that the short-term cost of carbon is on the $50 a ton. The long-term is actually quite higher depending on the model. Well, Heartland Institute came out with a paper that said that the social cost of carbon can really not be measured. They have a pamphlet out that says social cost of carbon, pick a number, any number, and that's right. It's somewhere between negative to positive. That who knows? It's certainly not a hard and fast number. So our conclusion on carbon tax, or my conclusion, is it's a cost with no real benefit. Even assuming current climate models are accurate, the impact on temperature in 2100 is trivial. You look at the Paris Agreement, if everybody fulfilled every ounce of the Paris Agreement, it would limit global warming by 0.2 to 0.3 degrees in the year 21-ish. And that you have this is a big issue. You have a free rider issue. China, India, and the developing world are putting in coal-fired power plants. And this comes from the UN's Annex 1, Annex 2 designations. Annex 1 are the developed countries, Annex 2 is undeveloped countries. Guess which China is? Guess which China is? The biggest carbon polluter in the world, or polluter, I say, they got me saying polluter. The biggest carbon emitter in the world, China, is so-called Dividend 2. So they're entitled to a slice of the $100 billion a year Green Climate Fund. Because, you know, we need to develop China. We need to pay for their development. Is there significant global warming due to CO2? Well, the science is highly questionable. Maybe 1 degree per doubling, 3 degrees, maybe not. Okay, and we talked about the inelasticity. In the past, Republican senators were against carbon taxes, but as the pressure mounting, 2020 senatorial elections are critical. Okay, that's carbon taxes. Now here is a list. You can go through, there is a website that you can go through and look at all the legislative initiatives. What you'll find here is a lot of green energy perks, infrastructure, charging stations, electric buses in national parks, you know, et cetera, a lot of green pork, which you might imagine. And there's a lot of carbon capture bills. For instance, our good buddy Crenshaw, HR 5864, New Energy Futures through Carbon Innovation Act, Carbon Capture and Research Hub. There's a Carbon Capture Act in 115th Congress, right on the bottom, HR 5865, Carbon Capture and Storage Innovation Act. So these are pretty popular, and they're supported by the Republicans. Now, what does carbon capture do? Well, it wastes a little bit less money, probably, than the other things, but at least the Republicans, they say, do. Now, here's the bottom line. We have 2 bills, and they're companion bills, HR 4447 and S2657. The Senate bill is sponsored by Murkowski, and the House bill passed Thursday before last. Now this is amazing. It's an 890-page extravaganza. I read one article. It said the Senate version, which I've heard is about 550 pages, is a compilation of about 50 bills. So on the way out the door, it looks like our Congress has blended together a lot of these proposals and have come up with these bills. Now, what is HR 4447? It's called Expanding Access to Sustainable Energy. It passed Thursday before last, 890 pages. It is an eye-watering document. Okay, if you want to go through it, it's amazing. The bill is best understood in the context of UN Agenda 21. Does everybody know what Agenda 21 is? This is an incredible, Agenda 21 is a UN initiative, and basically what it purports to do or wants to do is move people to cities, move them out of the countries. It has stuff like abolish private ownership of land. It's the most amazing thing in the world. But if you look at this bill in the context of Agenda 21, you'll see a lot of similarities there. For instance, the DOE is to establish energy-related building codes. You can look in that bill and you can find out how many CFM your ceiling fan is supposed to circulate. I mean, it's absurd. It's a very tops-down government thing. And there's some scary stuff in here. Energy efficient standards, they're going to establish offices to calculate energy efficiency in buildings and have standards and insulation, and it's wild. They're going to retrofit schools and government buildings. They call for smart technology and infrastructure. You know what smart power is? That's if the government can run a wire to your thermostat, and if they say, I want to reduce energy load, they're going to cut your power, and it'll be 90 degrees outside, and they say, tough luck, you can do that. But they established this on a federal level for federal buildings. Federal data centers opens the door for intrusive federal government. The Senate version, which is still going, it hasn't been voted on, it should be stopped. I don't know what's in it. I haven't seen the 550 pages, but let me tell you, this House bill is socialism incarnate, and if you look at the Agenda 21, I encourage everybody to look up Agenda 21 and what they have. We've talked about other climate-related issues. The Paris Agreement. I just want to point out one thing. The Paris Agreement was the way it was set up by the Democrats originally is that you could withdraw from it, but it took a year. You had to give a year's notice, and the earliest timing we could withdraw from it is after the 2020 elections. So in other words, they could have a snap back if the Democrats win.
It's like the Hotel California.
Yeah. The Cockroach Hotel, yes indeed.
You can never leave.
Yeah, so it's really an amazing. The guy named Deers has written a book on the Paris Agreement. If people really understood the Paris Agreement, it's really bad for the U.S. Trump is absolutely right in terms of rejecting that. The endangerment finding, we've already talked about, but that is a key. Now, the endangerment finding was a very limited ruling, and it had to do a lot with emissions from new cars and all that. So, I mean, it's on really legally tenuous grounds, and I think could be challenged. Grid reliability, that's going to have to be probably at a state or local level. But what's happening is as the number of renewable energy projects, especially wind and solar, kick up, it hurts the grid reliability. They're seeing that in California. Randy and I are looking at Texas, and 2 weeks ago I thought, Texas can't be as crazy as California. I was wrong, but anyway. So these are additional resources. The U.S. Congress that's a very good website. You can go to and you can search it and find out what's going on. There's a carbon pricing leadership council. Now we talked about the World Bank and IMF and all these international organizations. You can go, each one of them has a carbon pricing thing. American Energy Alliance, you can find out how your representative votes on all this. American for Carbon Dividends is very interesting. This Ted Halstead has started several PACs. He's a very interesting guy. You can Google him and find out about him. Climate Leadership Council to put out a statement on carbon taxes. That's the one that I was showing you a little bit there. The Great Climate Hustle 2 is a movie that came out a couple weeks ago, and it talks about energy as a mechanism, control of energy as a mechanism to basically get socialist type policies in the U.S. So I highly recommend that movie. It's entertaining and it's so true. It's hurtful.
Where's it played at?
You go online on the internet. You Google Climate Hustle 2. You buy tickets online and then you can get it online. So, did I make it, Randy?
Yeah.
Okay. If it's the first time if I ever did, 1 minute over. Okay.
I got questions.
Okay, fire away.
Okay, I have just 2 points.
Okay.
Number one, do you know the name of Woobles, Don Woobles? He was head honcho of the National Climate Assessment Report. I had some run-ins with him, and he was claiming in an email that there is a temperature. Now, Chris Essex has written a paper that there is no one temperature. And in fact, I think everyone knows there's no bloody temperature, a temperature of the globe.
Yeah.
There is an average temperature. And so even when they say the temperature has risen in the 20th century, the temperature, about 1 Fahrenheit degree, that doesn't tell you that from around 45 to 75, people were terrified about global cooling.
Sure.
Okay. So another point about the temperature, and I asked it to the speaker who came to my university, who is pushing global warming. I said, the temperature has risen about a Fahrenheit degree over the 20th century. Locally, the temperatures go in a range of about tens of degrees, not one degree.
Yeah.
Can you tell me how a local variation, how a global variation in temperature is affecting things locally? Now, it's not obviously affecting things locally because the temperature varies by tens of degrees. So that's one point.
Sure.
I think that one needs to explain this issue because the public is probably confused. There ain't no temperature of the globe. Okay.
Sure.
The other point is the issue of the Agenda 21 that you mentioned. Now, they want to move people into cities, as you were saying. Well, this smacks a little like moving people into ghettos, like during the Nazi
or Moscow.
Yeah.
And
Everybody
so
in an
Agenda
apartment.
21 is something that basically, at least implicitly, Trump has been going against by pushing sovereignty not only for the United States but for all other nations. And Agenda 21 would just put one leash around, it's one neck. It would be world government, and at the end of the leash would be the people, whoever they are, that get into dictating the commands. But
Absolutely.
those are my two.
No, that's very good. I mean,
about temperature, and the other two about the.
yeah, earlier today it was said, and you can look at the data, that the temperature correlates to CO2 40% of the time, which is a pretty lousy correlation. and the Agenda 21, like I say, if you look at the bill, the 890 pages, and then read Agenda 20, they're almost the same, the absolute same universe. I mean, they talk in Agenda 21, for instance, about abolishing private property ownership and private property rights. So, I mean, it's absurd. But it's very tops-down control, very prescribed. It's big government, the agencies, they talk about forming this committee and this assessment and this organization, and it's all tops-down. It's socialism. And the thing passed in the House.
And
Well, of course.
clear people.
Democrats
People need to
control
understand
it.
in languages that they can understand what's meant by socialism. I heard that some of the younger people think that socialism means getting together in groups.
Yeah, social benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. The planning, for instance, one of the things I found out is Houston now, they have the organizations that go into municipal planning. And basically they do this as sort of, a free advisory service. Well, Houston adopted a plan last year, and Mayor Sylvester Turner in Houston got big publicity out of it all. And you read the thing, and it's, all electric cars for all of Houston city services by 2030, and stuff like this. They're very good at infiltrating organizations, and using them. And I see this theme. In my research, I came up with 700 organizations that have climate-related themes, and it gives you a whole context of how the left is using organizations on every side in terms of religion, scientific organizations. They infiltrate. I mean, it's Saul Alesky is what it is. But thank you for your questions.
Okay, I'm going to, in a couple of minutes, try to summarize where I think we have opportunities that have been identified today. Okay, then I'm going to turn it over to our leader, Jim, for the shutdown. But the whole issue is, you heard enough about the endangerment project. Now, how we got to that was the bad guys filed a suit to say that emissions out of tailpipes from automobiles create a problem. Okay, that lawsuit ultimately got to the Supreme Court. Okay, and we lost. Now the problem that we lost, why we lost was they didn't spend a lot of time talking about science. If you look at the briefs filed, our guys were playing the arcane game of, well, it doesn't quite work, you didn't quite do it right, so look. The other side had 2 science briefs filed, 2. And we got our butts kicked before the Supreme Court. Now the whole idea is, the Supreme Court said, well, EPA, you can regulate CO2. Now the father of regulation of the air, John Dingell, said, if I'd wanted you to regulate CO2, I would have told you to. He wrote the Clean Air Act. Well, they ignored that. So all of a sudden, now we have the issue of the new EPA went out and said, well, we got authority now, we're going to regulate CO2. So that, the bad idea, lawsuit, became a bad idea before the Supreme Court begat another bad idea, the endangerment finding. So when the endangerment finding was put out there in regulations, it says, look, any greenhouse gas I can find, one molecule, if I can prove it's CO2, I got you. If I can prove it's CH4 methane, I got you. If I can prove it's one molecule of N2O, nitrous oxide, out of fertilizer, I got you. So they said, all I need to do is find one molecule anywhere in the greenhouse gas spectrum, I got you. Now, that allowed them to weaponize the Clean Air Act, so we had all this stupidity going on, and all of a sudden said, well, let's socialize this thing, called the social cost of carbon. Now, when Gregg mentioned those models, one model out there that says, oh, by the way, CO2 is a fertilizer, so if you put a lot of CO2 in, have a little bit warmer, you get a huge benefit. So you don't get to a problem until 2080. So Richard Toll has one model. So they took the two bad models, averaged it with the one good model, and said, see, we can regulate the hell out of it. So where we are now, if we don't nail the endangerment finding, we're out of luck. So the whole idea is they're going to wait until after the election to pull the trigger. They've been told over and over again. So that's one place we can play. It'd be a unique opportunity, but our stuff is already out there. The question is, who's going to pick it up and run with it? But hopefully the Trump administration will do that. Now, so that's one issue where we can play in a different, on a different timeline. Now, I hear this issue about cap and trade or cap and dividend. Think ration and tax. I keep telling people it's not a cap, it's a ration. You're using price to ration. And the point he made was key. How high a tax do you have to get a certain reduction in emissions? They never answered that question because it's never asked. So we have to start there. Said, look, NAM came out with an analysis. It's going to take $1,000 a ton of CO2, and you're only going to get about half of that, 60%. Now, who's the guy that recognized this was an issue? Al Gore. In 1997, the White House was running this model about we're going to put a tax on CO2 because we like the idea of the Kyoto Protocol. Well, I saw the effort to analyze, do the economics. There's a woman by the name of Janet Yellen with the White House. She was running the model. Now, I was asked to come in and look at the analysis they'd done, and they kept putting a higher. They started out with $10, 15, 20, 25, 30. They got to $40. Al Gore says, stop running the model. The model will not converge. What that means is they didn't get an answer that they liked. Al Gore said, we're never going to use that answer in public. So he shut this thing down for his ill-fated effort to get elected president. But they know there's a problem if you ever tell the people how much it's really going to cost. So there's a key place we can play. And I think by using the TRCS data input into the one model that you can use that can predict all this stuff, called MAGIC, okay? You can come up with a number and say, this is what the temperatures are going to be, this is what the sea level rise is going to be, but oh, by the way, it's not us, it's China and India. So we have to recreate the story and use a model and say, here are the numbers. So that's another possibility of going out there. I know, Jim, you talked about trying to get our guys involved in some modeling, but there's only one model that works, one that's been vetted, and that can be used. Now, let's talk about how do we help Wayne Christian and Isaac and Jason Isaac. They got a couple of projects. I think we can help them with trench troops. They got 4 cities that they got to take on. We know it's San Antonio, Dallas is coming, it's Austin, which may be a hopeless case, but you T-sippers are going to give them the challenge. Then Houston. So we can testify, we can do all things. So I think the idea is to say, look, we'll help you, we'll work with you, and if you need backup, we're willing to walk into the fray and say, not here, not now, not ever. Now, Keisha highlighted one issue that Wayne talked about, and Jason Isaac too, said they understand what moves the needle is if you hurt the floor, you got a problem. So that issue has been tested. TPPF has gotten the data, so we need to get our arms around that. So we take, we kind of marry up our simple science argument, but say, oh, by the way, if you do these stupid things, you don't have to. There's no climate crisis, but oh, by the way, here's who you hurt. So I think by having an approach that says, let's marry the science, which we're good at, with the public policy and the PR that we're not good at, so let's figure out how to do it. So I think between TPVF and Jason Isaac and Wayne Christian, we have plenty of opportunity right here in Texas. Because I think we can, if we can handle Texas, it may spread that we've got an argument that really works. But so I think that we've seen a couple of ideas. I think we can lay that out, and I'll work with Jim and Marty to see how do we get after this, but we need help. But the idea now is we have a challenge. We all know it. And I know our leader will help us climb that mountain. To you, Jim.
Okay, Randy, thank you for the summary and pointing us the direction we need to go. I also want to pursue with Bob Bauman what his contacts are and how can we get the word to potentially the president in time for one of the debates. If we could do those two things, if we could get the thing to the president and to the governor of Texas, we've done today's work.
How do they get a message to Trump? Trump understands this.
Like saying that.
He's heard this. Okay? And the whole idea is we can emphasize it, but I think it's going to be a Texas story. Texas, as a country, would be the 4th largest producer. If the Green New Deal ever gets legs, if stupid happens at any level, especially in Texas or this country, we're in trouble. The energy dominance position of Trump says we need our oil to back out Russian oil and Iranian oil, so we don't have to worry about who's in the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? We have to have our natural gas on the water and LNG to back out Russian gas going to Europe. It's a strategic play, geopolitical, but I think we have to say, here's a story because we're going to force this issue, so it has to go back through Gregg Abbott and the few people in Congress like Chip Roy. So look, tell the president, here's where we are, because he's got to understand that we're on his side, but we need clarity in terms of the science that's married with the policy. But I think that's an approach forward, and that's the only way to get it done. It may help. If Bob got the contacts through Kudlow, that's great. But I think there's another way in.
Let me just say this: this Senate 2657, that's them rejecting that bill is the only defense we have against this insanity that's called HR 4447. And I would encourage you, everybody, to go through, and you can pull that 890-page bill right off the internet, and it is, like I say, it is eye-watering. It is socialism incarnated. And if the Senate, Murkowski is the sponsor of the Senate bill, and she said that she thinks she can get this thing through the Senate with a few hours debate in this term. So to me, that's the most immediate threat we have to climate and energy sanity is this 2657. I've tried to do some calling into representative's office, but if you have contacts, especially in the Senate, that's definitely an area I would look at.
All right, guys, appreciate all the help from all of you, especially the crew. You were sensational. And Anita, as always, thank you. And I appreciate the support from the few TRCS members that have helped me. And we'll try to continue this series the best we can and when we can. So thanks to all, and to all, good night.
Good night.
Thanks.